Welcome to those of you at mochurch.tv. Welcome to those of you in person. I got a polite air hug for you from a distance. A pastor couldn't even do that nowadays. That'd be a scandal if a pastor went out hugging people in the streets. Definitely, you'd be written up, headlined. Pervert goes out in the streets. No, man, he's hugging people. You saw him? It was like the St. Louis Arch hug with some of them. I was trying to. Okay, so all right. So years ago, there was a family that helped start Momentum as a volunteer family. Back when we launched an opening day, they were part of what we called our launch team, the Munsons, and they may be online right now. Hi, Munsons. And back in that time, their son, Jordan, he went by Jordan here. Now he's kind of moved to being called Curtis. It was a middle name, first name thing, but now he goes by Curtis. So for those of you that know Jordan, I'm going to call him Curtis, and that'll help you not be confused for a second. Like, did they have another kid? We missed it. But Curtis. So back in the day, Curtis, he was baptized at Momentum. It was August 15th, 2010, so about 12 years ago, almost exactly. He was 7 years old, and when his parents, Stan and Heidi, told Curtis's older sister, Anna, that he was getting baptized, she started crying. And they said, Anna, what's up? Why are you crying? And they asked her specifically, they said, are you sad happy? And that's a way in their family that they describe when you're crying about something that's joyful, happy, you're excited, tears. And they said, are you sad happy? And she said, no. And they're like, well, wait, you're not sad happy, then aren't you happy for your brother, Curtis, getting baptized? Yeah. And they said, so we don't understand. So why are you crying, sweetie? Because Curtis is getting baptized. And, well, he makes me laugh, and now he's not going to be able to be funny anymore. It's like, ooh, very insightful, Anna. She has captured and caught on to something that maybe some of you have caught on to over the years. Maybe it was an aunt, maybe it was a family member, maybe it was a friend or a coworker, where you're like, that's really weird. Like, they got religion, or something like that. And then after that, they just weren't fun anymore. Like, it was actually seemed like a negative thing in some ways. Like, they actually became more of a stick in the mud. They actually became less loving, less authentic, less sincere, less helpful, less available, less gracious. Maybe they became more critical, pushy, judgmental, proud, and just flat out annoying or a bummer to be around. And you're like, man, that what Jesus does to people, And so I can understand Anna anticipating like, oh, man, he was such a fun little brother. Man, I'm going to miss that so much in him. Oh, going downhill. There goes the neighborhood, that kind of thing. And so maybe if you haven't seen that, because a lot of us, the truth in our culture today is we haven't actually seen or experienced that, but we have seen it portrayed a lot in TV and in Hollywood. I mean, if there's a Christian in a show now, it used to be kind of funny to me 16 years ago. Now I'm like, it's every time. She's the stick in the mud, Sheldon's mom, or something like that. She's the one who's the worst in this scenario. It's always the Christian. If there's a Christian, guaranteed, they're the whodunit bad guy at the end. Like, oh, that's not even a surprise anymore that it was the Christian, the preacher, the priest, the nun, whatever. You're just like, that's a given. But a lot of times when someone becomes a follower of Jesus, a lot of times the expectation is gloom. A lot of times the emotion is sadness. Aw, wah, wah. My buddy became a Christian. That's the worst. The emoji that represents it is the frowny face. Like, oh, I lost a funny friend. They were such a great person. Now who knows what drum they're going to be beating, what sign they're going to be holding up, what thing they're going to be doing, because they're a follower of Jesus. So go to Acts chapter 8. You can download the Bible app for free to follow along. I'll be in the NIV version, New International Version. So we're continuing kind of a part 2 of a series that we just did in the spring. It was called Good News for All People. And we're just going to pick it back up for 4 more topics here in the summer. And it's out of the book of Acts in the Bible. And the book of Acts is about the earliest Christianity. Acts 2 is about the birthday of the church and the birth of the church. And so it's especially about where the early church got its power from God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit living inside of Christians. And so it's kind of like what we're doing is looking at the question, how did Christianity sweep the most powerful empire that the world had ever seen up to that point in history? Like, historians look back on it and sociologists look back on it and they're like, how did this happen? This little ragtag bunch, how did this eventually spread? And they went from being persecuted and poked at and killed or made fun of or shunned or what all, and eventually most of the thinking world in the Roman Empire were followers of Jesus. And it spread like crazy, like a toe fungus everywhere, okay? Speaking of negative images for Christianity. And so in the series, we're just taking a look at the story of Jesus and the cross and the resurrection, what we call the gospel, that Jesus died for us. And then he conquered the grave. And the fact that people left Jerusalem sharing the good news, the gospel of Jesus, telling that story, and they shared it with all people, all kinds of people from different walks of life, and it spread throughout the Mediterranean world. So today, it's a story about a guy named Philip. And if you are familiar with the Bible at all, this is not the Philip that was one of the original OG 12 of Jesus' disciples. That's not one of those guys. There is a Philip in there, but this is not one of them. This guy is a guy that was kind of assigned to a leadership role in Acts chapter 6. Really, it was just a servant leadership role. There were widows, Christian widows, that were being overlooked in the distribution of food to help them out. And he was one of the people, one of 7 guys assigned the task, hey, make sure none of the widows are overlooked. So he was a servant leader. And so that's the Philip we're talking about. And here just 2 chapters later, in Acts chapter 8, verse 5, it says this. Philip went down to a city, we don't know what city, in Samaria, and proclaimed the Messiah, that's Jesus and his story there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the signs he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. That's the proper order there. They saw the miracles, the signs that he performed, and it validated his message. Like, wow, we need to really listen to what he's saying about Jesus because of the miracles. Verse 7, for with shrieks, impure spirits came out of many, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was great joy in that city. So Samaria is a region, and we don't know which Samaritan city this was in. It's unnamed, and scholars kind of debate. It might have been this one, or it might have been this one, but we don't know. But it was a city in Samaria that he went to, and he preached the good news of Jesus, and he helped people, and he performed miracles and all this stuff. So first off, I just want to say, man, it was a bold move on Philip's part to go into Samaria. Just beginning there, because it's well documented, there was a history of animosity and racism between Jews and Samaritans. They hated each other. I mean, big time. And so the Samaritans were Jews who had at one point intermarried with Canaanites or Gentiles or non-Jews. And so they intermarried. So the Jews looked at them and they were like, what? How could you do that? Like the traditional Jews would do that. And they would look. So just picture this. So the Samaritans were half Jews, half Arabs. Just let that sit for a second. Okay? Like, have you heard any animosity there? So that's the kind of thing that was going on. And so because of that, the Jews looked at the Samaritans and they considered them half-breeds. Or in Harry Potter terminology, mudbloods. They were mudbloods, like, ugh, yuck, Samaritans. And they felt the same way about the Jews. Like, you guys are so holier than thou. You guys are so superior. And so centuries before Jesus was born, the Jews were brought into exile to the Babylonian Empire. And when they were allowed to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, they wouldn't let the Samaritans be a part of rebuilding the temple. So the Samaritans were like, fine, we'll take our own sacred hill and build our own temple, which was sacrilegious to them, the Jews. They're like, you can't build your own temple. Yeah, we can. See if we don't, And so they're going back and forth. And the animosity just builds and builds throughout history since like the 10th century BC. This has been going on. And so Philip marches into Samaria with the good news of Jesus. Dang. A few years ago, there was a guy named Scott, buddy of mine, who told me about a dude who had a house church going on. Like, people were packed into his house, and he was preaching to them, and they were having, like, worship and house church in this house. And the dude who was doing this, his name was Marcus, and he was about 6'6", big old black dude. And he was like, we need to get these people out of my house. Like, I need to start a church, like, in an auditorium. Like, we're busting out of my house. So my buddy Scott said, hey, maybe this is a church plant, starting a new church, that we could support Marcus and this church. And he's like, you want to meet him, have lunch? I was like, absolutely. That's all we were looking to do, was like continue to like multiply and help other churches get started. So Marcus picked the place we were going to meet. He picked a soul food place in Huff. You following me? He picked a soul food place in Huff. And we all drove separately. And so my buddy Scott met us there. I met there. Marcus met us there. I parked out in the street. I walked to the soul food place. There was like a few dudes across the street from this restaurant who stopped everything they were doing with a record scratch. Like, and just stared at me every step I made all the way to that restaurant. And I was like, okay, I gotta warm up here because I might get jumped by 12 people right now. So I got into the soul food place. We sat down and met Marcus. We talked about his story and his house church that was going on. He was adamant, we got to get these people out of my house, okay? Too many people. They're breaking stuff and all that. But he was like, yeah, this is the neighborhood I live in right now. This is kind of where I'd like to start the church. My wife would like to start it in another neighborhood. But he was like, out that window right there, those dudes that I was talking about, he was like, that's a gang, and they're called this. He goes, and right on the other side over here, there's the street right here, there's a gang there called this. There's a gang this direction, gang this direction. He's like, but I'm cool with all of them. I know them all. I'm cool with all of them. And then he leaned forward and he said something that just didn't need to be said. He leaned forward to me and said, by the way, don't ever come here without me. I know that, Marcus. Do I look like a dumb man? I know that. So it's like, this is what Philip's doing. He is marching into Samaria with this animosity. Like, white people haven't just freely walked around in Huff since 1966. There's a history there, right? Oh, there's a history with the Samaritans and the Jews. And so Philip, a Jewish man going into there, Samaria, in that region, was a bold move. That's like me doing ministry in Huff. That's like Andre Frazier doing ministry in Amish country. Okay? He gave me permission to say that. He thought it was funny. He thought it was funnier than you guys did. He was up here cracking. So there's a guy whose name is Ajit Fernando, who's an Indian dude, who's a Bible scholar. He also is one of the leaders in the Youth for Christ parachurch movement. But he's a leader in Sri Lanka. And he says this, in a joyfully powerful way, ministry in enemy territory demonstrates the power of the gospel to break down human barriers. It doesn't matter how much history there is here. The gospel has the power to say, man, the playing field is even. Like, people that shouldn't be associated with each other, people that shouldn't be fist bumping, people that shouldn't be hugging, people that shouldn't be worshiping beside of each other, people that shouldn't be serving together. The gospel has the power to break down those barriers so that people together can link arms and serve God. Now, here's the thing with Philip, just to give a little background. He was what you call the Hellenistic Jew. I know it sounds like I swore, but he was a Hellenistic Jew, and he was hella good at it. And so what that means is he was a Jew, but he had adopted Greek culture because the world had been Hellenized by Alexander the Great. He had adopted Greek culture where many of the traditional Jews were like, no. We're going to keep speaking this way. We're going to keep doing these things. Do not adopt Greek culture. They were called Hebraic Jews, coming from the root word Hebrew. So they were very traditional. He probably didn't have as much problem walking into Samaria and accepting Samaritans. Now, I don't know about them with him, but he probably had less of that prejudice and bias in his mind because he had already accepted Greek culture and he wasn't just saying, okay, it's just this, our way, our traditional way, or nothing. He didn't have probably the animosity of his traditional Jewish brothers. And so he marched in there and he believed Jesus is good news for all people. Jesus is good news for all people. And he marched in there. And Christ is for the world. Christ is for this city in Samaria. And so how was it good news to this city that he went to? Well, three quick things I'll just say is, one, the gospel, it sends us to people that we see as, quotes, unclean. And in this case, that's exactly the kind of word that the Jews would use of the Samaritans. They were unclean. They got their own fake temple, whatever, the faux temple over there, whatever. You know, they saw them as unclean spiritually and racially and all this stuff. But in Philip's case, the Samaritans were totally unclean. Second thing is the good news urges us to cross barriers. Like the good news tells us to do that. It urges us to cross those cultural and racial barriers. And in fact, in the next story, which we already covered in the last series, Philip's going to go on and meet an Ethiopian treasurer who there's even more barriers and racial differences with, and he's going to baptize that dude into Jesus Christ. Like this is almost like a baby step. If there was like threat or boldness going into this situation, oh, wait for the next thing the Spirit of God is about to send you to do. And so that's what happens next. And the third thing is the good news provokes us to serve the city. Like he walks into the city and he is good news to them. He speaks good news and he becomes good news to them with the things that he does. This is the bottom line. The gospel confronts us with the question, how dare you feel superior to anyone? Think about that. This is for me too. It's not just for you. This is the Dan Smith too. How dare you, Dan Smith, feel superior to anyone? Like, because when you look at the gospel, the Son of God had to die on the cross for my sins to reconcile me to God, that I would put faith in the cross and in Jesus and say, I take that as my penalty for sin. The Son of God had to suffer on the cross. So who are you to feel superior to anyone? Whether that's unchurched people, whether that's poor people, maybe this is more difficult. Whether that's rich people, oh, that had a nerve. Oh, can't speak well of rich people. But whether it's poor people, rich people, uneducated people, people with criminal records, addicts, people with disabilities, homeless people, who are you to feel superior? The good news says, man, all that is lifted. Like we are all broken human beings. Our brokenness just looks different from one another. And so we're all broken, and so we can't feel superior, and that is what makes it good news. And that's what helps us cross barriers to say, yeah, they don't look just like me. They aren't from the same kind of neighborhood, but they're just like me. In so many ways, they're just like me. And I love 8 verse 8. In Acts 8 verse 8 says this. At the end of it, there was great joy in that city. And here's the deal. Every Christian like Philip should be good news in a way that brings joy to the city, to their neighborhoods, to their school system, wherever it is that you are, to your university, to the arts community, to the music scene, wherever it's at, to your softball team, wherever it's at, to be good news to that city. And this is just the opposite of what Anna expected when her brother is embracing Christianity and Jesus and being baptized. It's the exact opposite, like, oh no, this is going to be gloom. All the good news is going away. But the irony is, no, that might be like our cultural perception. That might be some examples you've seen or we've seen. But the truth is, the gospel is good news, and it brings joy. Back in Saturday, June 11th, beginning of the summer-ish, we opened up the property, as we've been doing, for free parking for the Macedonia fireworks, the Summerfest, and we call it the Summerfest parking party. Because we open it up for free, and we also cook hot dogs for free, and there's glow sticks for the kids, and there's rent a free ice cream truck that gives away treats that we've paid for and all that kind of stuff. And so, man, we just had people on our team that killed it planning that, and then our volunteer team came and just killed it, did an awesome job serving and loving people that night on June 11th. A few days later, we got this card in the mail that I wanted to read to you. It said this: we wish to thank you for your generosity during the most recent fireworks display for the Macedonia Summerfest. We appreciated the ample parking area, providing a perfect seating/viewing area. The free snacks, water, yummy ice cream truck, and glow sticks provided by the most friendly crew were an added bonus. Thank you for giving our family an awesome night to remember. Happy summer, Darlene, Jim, and Lauren. Man, when you serve people in the name of Jesus, it's good news to the city. Macedonia, Twinsburg, whatever cities people came from to come park, and they didn't expect the buildings to be open for their little kids to go potty. I got to be a greeter for the cars coming in, and when I told them that, any of you who've had little kids like I have are like, that's a game changer. Because I was going to be peeing in those Christmas trees with my kids within 10 minutes. I know how it's going to go down. And so it's a game changer. Like, what? There's free hot dogs? What? There's the ice cream truck? Are you kidding? So many people responded just like this card, but they did it verbally to me as like the greeter, telling them what's free and what to do and all that kind of stuff. People are like, what? That's good news. Like, it's reminding people, no, people who are the hands and feet of Jesus are good news in the community. They're very, very good news. Yesterday, our band rocked it out in the Twins Day Parade in Twinsburg. And yeah, it was awesome. It was Party Rock is in the house tonight. That's what it is. I mean, it was just, they were great. And we had just an awesome big team of volunteers walking alongside. We had a trailer with a band on it. We had Ray Alley pulling the trailer in his blue sweet Bronco, and we had all these people in Momentum volunteer t-shirts, the new t-shirt that we have for volunteers, walking along, giving pieces of candy to kids who wanted it in the crowd, and old people in the crowd, whoever wanted some candy, whoever needed a sugar high, just giving it to them. And man, it was so awesome. But thank you, team, who served in that way yesterday. But seriously, you guys are good news to the city. I mean, people were dancing and clapping. I mean, I forget till every year we're in the crowd that not a lot of people play music in the parade. So people are doing other fun stuff in the parade, and then all of a sudden, here comes a live band playing, and I'm like, oh, that is really cool. I kind of forget, like, this is unique in a parade. And people are clapping and dancing and shaking what their mama gave them and all that kind of stuff, and they're smiling. Man, you're good news when you serve in the city in that way. So this Saturday, the reason I planned this message at this time is because of what we're in between with some of those opportunities to serve and what's coming up. The Back to School Fest is really kind of an all-church, like, all skates back in the day. And, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You're like, oh, I might hold hands with that girl. I'm 12, she's 12, we're going to get married. All skates, couple skates. This is like an all skate for our church. Like, man, this is an all team. Let's all hands on deck serve the neighborhood like crazy in this Back to School Fest that we throw for free. So it's, noon to 4 p.m. this Saturday, and right here, 1717 East Aurora Road, Macedonia. And we're just going to throw a big party for everyone and tell them there's no donations accepted. There's always a family, always a person who's like chasing me around at the end. Please let us give something. And they're holding something. Like, please let us give something. I'm like, I'm sorry. I just sewed my pocket shut. I'm so sorry, so they can't believe you won't accept donations and all that stuff. But there'll be live music, free hot dogs, chips, cotton candy. Kona Ice Truck is what we provide free treats out of. The truck isn't free, but the treats are. Carnival games with prizes. Air tattoo artists are going to be there giving, free airbrush tattoos to people. There'll be an 18-foot inflatable slide, 30-foot inflatable obstacle course. Free haircuts for everyone that wants one. Dude, I'm going to get my hair did. I'm going to look good, okay? So I'm like, sweet. And so there'll be tons of photo ops, Disney princesses, and Buzz Lightyear. One of the Minions will be there. Mario, my favorite, Paw Patrol is going to be there. So, I mean, it's going to go crazy. And it's all free. And you get a chance to see people kind of shocked by the good news. Man, this is good news to the city. This is good news to the city right here. Like, why do we do this? Because we get a chance to be good news for the city. Which city? All of them. People come from all kinds of different cities. Macedonia, Twinsburg, Cleveland, Garfield Heights, all these different places. And they show up and they're like, really? I saw this on a Facebook boost. And yeah, I'm like, come check this. Is it really free? Can I give a donation? No. Last year I met a mom out front. We had just started the event. And she came up and she had a couple kids with her. She was like, hey, you don't know me, but I just want to tell you real quick, thank you so much for doing this every year. She said, I live right on the other side of those trees. She said, I live there, and during the week, I bring my kids over, and they play in the playground. And so thank you that, one, we can play in the playground whenever we want. And she goes, but they love this every year when you guys do this, so thank you so much for doing this. And I was like, oh, my gosh, like, how cool is that? We get to be good news for this family that just lives on the other side of the trees somewhere right there. And I was like, man, that's super cool. She didn't say they live in the trees. Like, that'd be... We're tree people. Thank you. This is a solid meal for us. That wasn't how it went down. But years ago, we used to do something called the Fall Fun Fest. And in this particular era, it was in Garfield Heights at the middle school. And we would rent out the middle school and we'd have bounce houses. And, the band would rock out. It was pretty much the same stuff in a lot of ways as Back to School Fest, except there were bales of hay everywhere. And we also had a projector with a screen to play college football on because some dads were like, children, football. Okay, both. And so we would do that. And so we did that for a few years. And that was really cool. But one time there was a guy who, when his daughter was jumping in a bounce house, he started talking to a Momentum volunteer, and he said, man, I got to tell you my story. He goes, I get my daughter every other weekend, and he said, this is my weekend to have my daughter, and it's her birthday. He said, and I just got laid off. This is not long after a lot of really economic, downturn times in this era. He was like, I don't have a job. I don't have a dollar to my name. He said, I've got my daughter for the weekend. He said, I was literally driving around Garfield Heights like, what am I going to do for her for her birthday? I can't even afford a cake. I can't afford anything to do for her. And she doesn't know this. She doesn't know I'm broke. Yeah, I'm driving around thinking, please, like, what can I do with her to have fun today? And I see signs for a free fall fun fest in Garfield Heights. He said, I pulled in. He goes, I've been here for a few hours with my daughter having a blast. You guys saved my butt. Like, thank you so much. My daughter's having an awesome birthday because of you guys throwing this party for the community. And when I think back on that story, because that's been one of the anecdotal stories that I remember through the years, when I don't want to do it, when I don't want to get up early on a Saturday morning, and I don't want to do this and that, and talk to 8,000 people coming in cars, when I don't want to do it, I'm like, man, remember that guy, and remember that mom? It reminds me of the slogan that we have, helping people win. Like, we helped that dude win as a dad. We're helping this mom win as a mom when she's like, okay, I'm done. I'm just going to take them to the playground. I'm going to sit there, get some quiet time while they play on the playground. Man, we're helping parents win. And that's how we're good news in the city sometimes, by doing things like that. When you serve at the Back to School Fest on Saturday, you are being good news to the world, man. You're being good. The opposite of what people expect, the gloom, the judgmental, the get off there, stay off the grass, that kind of, the exact opposite. Like, we didn't expect, we're stomping all over their grass. Like, the bathrooms are open and my kid is still peeing in the Christmas tree over there. And people are like, that's all right, boys will be boys. We pee, what are you going to do? And so we get a chance to be good news. So please, get on the team, jump on the team, be a part of this all church serving event. And go to MomentumChurch.com and just say, yeah, I'll help cook hot dogs. I'll help man a game. I'll help be a parking attendant, whatever it is, and just be good news for people who are in our community. Years ago, there was this guy and his wife, Rich and Dory Gorman, who they were kind of candidates to start another church like Momentum somewhere in the Cleveland area. They came here, and we were kind of vetting each other, like, do we think they're solid leaders for great stuff about them? Same with Cleveland. Like, is God calling us to Cleveland was their question. Ultimately, they thought that God was calling them to Chicago. And so, they went to Chicago, and I think God can forgive them of that. But they went to Chicago, and some of you might recognize the name Dory Gorman because she spoke at the women's retreat last year, Momentum's women's retreat in 2021. Well, one morning when they moved to Chicago to start the church that they started, Rich was doing something that I really recognized, and that was when I was new, the video, didn't know anybody in the city, and I'm trying to how do I parachute drop into a city, and how do we serve neighborhoods? How do we connect with people? How do we love people in the name of Jesus? I didn't know anybody here. And so I'm wringing my hands like, how can we serve? He was doing the same thing in this urban neighborhood in Chicago, sitting in a cafe by the window, looking out the window at people walking to work or walking to a commuter train to get to work. And he's wringing his hands like, what can we do to serve and encourage these people? And he said the thing that he noticed is as he sat in that window, people were walking around like zombies, just in the grind, doing the same thing that he goes, they just stared at the ground and they walked. And he said they might not have been, but they looked so depressed. They looked so sad. They looked so downtrodden and melancholy. He said, I just sat there like, what can we do to encourage and inspire and be good news to these people and offer them hope? And he said, then I just suddenly, after all this time sitting there wringing my hands thinking about it, had an idea that I think was from God. He said, what if we every night went out and we did sidewalk chalk all over the sidewalk in our neighborhood, in this area that's well, walked? What if we put encouraging message and messages of love and of hope and of truth also, and inspiration and challenging things? What if we did that and people as they walked along staring at the ground would see these messages and they put a hashtag on it and they called it Chalk the Block? And so a little team, because they didn't have much of a team yet at that time, whoever was willing went out in the night and they would just chalk the walk together, chalk the block. And so they'd go through and they wrote messages on the sidewalk like, you could live a good story. They wrote messages like, your yesterday does not define your today. They wrote messages like, would your 10-year-old self be happy with who you are today? Ooh. And they wrote things like, maybe what you are holding on to is holding you back. Or all things can be made new. Or you were meant for amazing things. And so I love that these messages, it isn't just all rainbows and unicorns and Skittles. Like everything's just like, you're the best. You can be the best at everything. It wasn't that. It was like, some of those are challenging. Like some people would read that and be like, man, would my 10-year-old self like who I've become? Am I just fighting to climb the corporate ladder? Am I stepping on people? Am I competing with all my coworkers to try to be, whatever it is? Like, I think my 10-year-old self would probably punch me in the face. And so there were challenging messages too, but there were also messages of motivation and inspiration and of love and of value. It was like such a great mix in these sidewalks. And so Chalk the Block, they did it. It was powerful to people. Like people said the feedback they received was really astonishing to them. It exceeded their expectation. People were being inspired and encouraged just by these simple little messages. And so people started taking pictures. And of course, they started uploading them with the hashtag. And they were seeing all this good news bringing joy to the city. And so eventually a DePaul University student made a video documentary about it. Next thing you know, the Chicago Tribune did a story on it. And it just kept spreading. One day there was a girl named Keisha who had just moved back to the Windy City. Hadn't lived there for a while, and she was super discouraged about life, and she was trying to get her bearings back in the city again, and she was staring at the ground, walking to her commuter train, headed that direction, and she said she was just stressing about her finances, her job, an email she had just gotten from an abusive ex-boyfriend, and so she's like, I'm just consumed. She said, and I'm walking along, and I look down, and I see a message that says, here is the world, beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. And she was like, who wrote that? She said, my eyes welled up with tears as I walked the rest of the way to the station. She said, and I couldn't get those words out of my mind. I wrote them in my journal. I started pondering them and reminding myself of them when I get overwhelmed with the anxiety and the stress. Like, do not be afraid. Till eventually she was like, where do those words come from? Joshua 1, by the way. Do not be afraid. She was like, and not only where did they come from, who wrote them? And she went online, she found the hashtag, she followed it, and it led her to Rich and Dory's church. And she went in and she was like, the vibe, these people that are seeking after Jesus, they're all in different places, but they're following after Jesus. I want to be a part of a community like this. And she entered into that community because they were being good news for the city. Now, here's my challenge for you is this. Will you pray with me all week, this week? Whenever you think about the Back to School Fest, and after you've already signed up, will you pray with me and just be like, God, this is in your control. Will you send people in our direction who are spiritually hungry, who are looking to take a next spiritual step? Who, it's great if they're like, man, I need something to do with my kid and I want to connect. Yeah, we want to be good news. But also people who are like, dang, people are serving here in the name of Jesus and I want to be a part of something like that, something bigger than myself. I want to be a part of something where people are given value and they're loved and they're learning to give of themselves. None of these people have to be here. People think that stuff while they're at the Back to School Festival. And why is it? It's all because of Jesus. So pray, God, will you send people who are searching spiritually, who are spiritually hungry, and send them to the Back to School Fest. Make the right people, Lord, see a boosted video on Facebook that's a promo for the Back to School Fest. Make the right people hear their friend when their friend invites them. Make the right people receive that invite, maybe on social media from one of their buddies, and be like, oh, I almost didn't notice that. Make them notice it, God. People who are really searching and hungry. And I think about, in every church, in every community, there's always a handful of people who are kind of like Rich, who are either sitting around wringing their hands thinking about it, or some people are just wired to think about, man, how can we encourage and inspire and love and serve people more? And maybe you're one of those idea people. Man, we love idea people. And so there might be some people who are naturally wired like that. Like, I got ideas on how we can serve. Here's the thing. We love creative people who are also unoffendable when we don't use all the ideas. Because we only have so many resources, you know what I mean? But we love ideas. Generate ideas. Send us ideas. And then just don't get mad when we don't do all of your ideas. It's no offense. I'm telling you in advance. It's not you. It's us trying to figure out, how do we allocate the resources that we have in the best direction and try to be good news to the people around us in the name of Jesus. And then I also think, what if the whole church, though, put a little thought into that? Like, what would it look like for us to be good news where you work, or for you, like Philip, to be good news in somewhere in your area? How could we be good news to our city or our cities? Let me close with this one little final point. There's a guy that wrote the book of Acts. His name is Luke. He's a Christian physician. He was a doctor. He wrote the Gospel of Luke, and then this book of Acts that we're in is actually the sequel. So it's basically like Jesus and, like I said, the 12 OG apostles, and then the death and the resurrection of Jesus, the good news. But then this next installment, the book of Acts, is really about, okay, now by the power of God's Spirit, it's in the hands of people. Jesus has left this and said, okay, now be my hands and feet. Like, you guys, go do this. Take this to the world. And so that's kind of the 1-2 punch here. Well, that guy that I mentioned earlier, the Indian Bible scholar and Youth for Christ leader, Ajit Fernando, he points this out. He says, in the book of Acts, when you get to Acts 6, verse 6, there's a transition. He said that transition is that all previous to that, the OG 12 disciples have really played the prominent role up to Acts 6:6. But at Acts 6:7, there's a transition that happens where it now really becomes the focus on the second generation of leaders in the church. And that's people like the guy we talked about today, Philip, another guy named Stephen, and especially a guy named Paul. And they're all second generation leaders. And a beautiful thing happens in the chapter that we're in Acts chapter 8, is that Peter and John, two of the OGs, they basically end up following the lead of Philip, a second generation leader, and they begin preaching in the cities and towns in Samaria. Wow. And so that's really interesting, because at Momentum, we've been saying for years, pretty much close to opening day, at Momentum, everyone is a leader or a potential leader. Everyone at Momentum is a leader or a potential leader. So in God's church, including Momentum, we're always looking for the next generation of leaders that are being raised up, no matter their age, because sometimes the next generation are some of the older people in Momentum who are like, I'm just beginning the spiritual walk, or I've never given of myself or been selfless to serve on a team. And so I want to just challenge you to end with is the question, is God calling you to be a next generation leader at Momentum? There's a constant recycling in some ways. I mean, the pandemic, we've had so many leaders and volunteers and people who just showed up because, this could be done by anyone, so I'll do it. We've had so many of those people come and go. And so there's this constant, turnover with that kind of thing, especially with the pandemic. And so is God calling you to be a next generation leader? Now, here's the deal. For some teams, you might have to audition. For some teams, you might have to meet certain requirements. For some teams, you may have to apprentice first. That's some teams, okay? Some teams are hand-selected. For your blessing, we handpick the singers through auditions. We pass the savings on to you, okay? So not everyone gets to sing. You don't want me singing, people. You want Andre, not Dan. Let that be the standard, okay? But your fresh energy and ideas mixed with the wisdom of the current generation of leaders and their encouragement to you as being seasoned veterans, man, that is a powerful combination that can be good news to our city. Let's pray.